All right, welcome back to the Duck Dive. You know how we like to put on our thinking caps here? Well, today's going to be a real workout for those brain muscles. We're taking some super complex ideas and putting them under a philosophical microscope.
Yeah, like a stress test for big ideas, see if they hold up under pressure.
Exactly. And the idea we're going to be dissecting today, it comes from Śāntideva, a Buddhist monk, philosopher, poet, the whole deal, back in 7th, 8th century India. And get this, some people think he's the most important Buddhist thinker ever when it comes to ethics.
Huge claim, right?
Right.
But his stuff, especially these two works, the Bodhisattva, we'll just call it BCA for short, and the Shikha-samkhayas, they've been super influential for centuries.
Right, and our main source today is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Śāntideva, which is seriously in depth. Now just imagine this guy saying, forget about saving yourself. It's all about helping everyone reach liberation. That's his ethical jam.
Pretty radical, right? And these texts, they're not gathering dust on some shelf. I mean, the Dalai Lama himself says the BCA is his favorite.
So listeners, imagine us with our noses in these texts, highlighting, underlining, trying to pick out what a philosopher would find most interesting about Śāntideva's work. That's what we're doing today. We're going to break down his big arguments, the logic behind them, and then really think about how they might change how we understand ethics and, get this, even the nature of reality itself. So, first things first, gotta set the stage. Tell us about the world Śāntideva was living in.
Well, we don't have a ton of biographical info. There's this whole story about him being royalty, but those kinds of stories are common in Buddhist writings, and they're more symbolic than historical fact. What we do know is that he was around between the late 7th and mid 8th centuries CE.
Oh, how do we know that?
Another Indian scholar, Śāntiragta, quotes him in something written around 763 CE.
Gotcha. So what was going on back then?
So in North India, Buddhism was kind of on the decline, but that doesn't mean things were stagnant. As Śāntideva shows us that people were still coming up with new ideas.
Makes sense. Now, about his two big works, you mentioned their names, but what are they like?
Yeah, so the BCA, it's a philosophical poem all laid out in chapters and verses, easy to cite. The Shas, though, it's more like a collection, with quotes from Mahayana Sutras and Śāntideva's commentary sprinkled throughout.
So citing those is a little different.
Yep. BCA, we cite chapter and verse. Shas, we usually use page numbers from a specific Sanskrit manuscript.
Good to know. Okay, so now for a little story time. You've got to tell the legend of Śāntideva at Nalanda University.
Oh, this is a good one. Legend has it, Śāntideva wasn't exactly a model student. People called him Busuku, which apparently stood for someone who just ate, slept, and... oh, you get the picture.
Sounds a bit like some college students I knew.
Maybe. Anyway, the other monks, they thought he was slacking off big time, so they planned this big public humiliation. During a festival, they were going to make him recite a text. They even built this huge throne, expecting him to totally crash and burn.
Oh, man, the pressure.
Right. But here's the twist. Instead of reciting some memorized text, Śāntideva starts presenting his own work, the BCA.
No way! What did people think?
Total shock. Here's this guy as he thought he was lazy, and he's spitting out these incredible verses. And then, while he's deep in meditation, he starts floating.
He's levitating.
Full-on levitation. And then, right at verse IX.34, poof, he disappears. But his voice, it keeps reciting from the sky.
That's wild. And that verse, IX.34, it says, when neither entity nor non-entity remains before the mind, since there is no other mode of operation, grasping no objects, it becomes tranquil. So what's this emptiness thing all about?
That verse and the whole legend gets right to one of Śāntideva's big ideas. What's reality, really? But to get emptiness, we got to start with another Buddhist teaching. No self or not man.
Okay, so no self. It's fundamental to Buddhism, but it kind of goes against, everything we feel.
Totally. Early Buddhism says, hey, we don't need this permanent self thing to explain experience. It's all about impersonal causes and effects. Śāntideva takes this and runs with it. He says there's a difference between what's true conventionally, day to day, and what's ultimately true.
So, I see myself in the mirror and think, yep, there I am, but that's not the whole story.
Right. Early Buddhism and those Abhidharma schools, they say the real stuff is actually super simple, momentary events. Everything else, including our feeling of me, is just a mental construct, a way to deal with all the change happening.
So it's not like there's no me, but the me is always changing.
More like a river than a statue. And Śāntideva gives these great examples of how causes work without intention. Like wind blows through trees and whoosh, fire starts. The wind and trees didn't plan to make fire, but it happened anyway. He says our actions are like that. We do things, but there's not always this fixed, independent doer pulling the strings. He even says, I have taught the aspects of action, but no agent exists in the 10 directions. It's just like when trees, agitated by the wind, produce fire. The wind and the trees do not think we should generate this fire. However, fire arises. The performance of action is similar.
Wow, so that really makes you rethink, like, who's responsible for what?
For sure. Then he's got this other example. Munja and balbaja grass, woven into rope. Or a water wheel, all those parts. None of them work alone, but together they do something. He's saying, our existence is kind of like that, dependent on tons of factors, no one thing running the show. Compounded things proceed by means of causes and conditions, mutual causality and dependent arising. Foolish people don't realize this, he writes. For example, by the power of effort, munja grass and balbaja grass can be woven together into a rope. A water wheel turns, but the individual parts can't turn by themselves. In the same way, all the aspects of being exist in dependence on the combination of the others. From the most distant past to the farthest future, one of these existing by itself is not apprehended.
But then if there's no stable self, what about rebirth? That always trips people up.
Yeah, it's a big question. Śāntideva and his sources tackle it head on. Like in the Rice Sheaf Sutra, there's this analogy, the moon reflecting in water. Moon doesn't go in the water, but the reflection's there. Rebirth is like that, a continuation of causes, not some fixed soul-jumping bodies.
Okay, I kind of get that.
He also uses the seal and its impression. Seal makes the mark, but it doesn't move into the mark. They're not totally separate either. Śāntideva is saying, things like us, we're not wiped out at death, but we're not eternally the same either. He writes, although a seal produces a seal impression, we don't apprehend that the seal transmigrates. It isn't there in the impression, but nor are they wholly different. In the same way, composite things are not annihilated and not eternal. It's important to get that no self isn't saying we don't exist. It's about how we exist. Not fixed, not independent like we think.
These analogies are really helping, gotta say. But then Śāntideva takes us into Madhyamaka, middle way thinking, and things get, like, even deeper.
You're telling me. Abhidharma, they break reality down into these really tiny, real things. But Madhyamaka, started by Nagarjuna, they go further. They say, nothing has svabhava.
Svava? What's that?
Tricky to translate. Intrinsic nature is one way. Like a thing existing on its own, totally independent, and you can know it just as it is. Think of a chair. We say it's for sitting. But that's not like built into the wood or metal, right? It's how the parts are put together and our idea of using it to sit. So Avaba asks, did anything really have that kind of independent being?
So, like, nothing has this fixed, unchanging core, this whatness.
You got it. Madhyamaka says, nope, nothing's like that. Everything, even us, it's impermanent, always changing, dependent on a zillion other things, and we only understand it through our own ideas. Can't find anything alone, always got to point to something else. So Madhyamaka says, everything's empty of that kind of inherent, independent being.
Empty, like it doesn't exist.
For them, emptiness means nothing exists ultimately. It exists conventionally in relation to other stuff, but not ultimately on its own.
Gotcha. And Śāntideva, he's all over these Madhyamaka ideas, especially in BCA Chapter 9.
Totally. He uses all these analogies for emptiness, like the mirage.
Yeah.
It looks like water, people see it, so it exists in a way.
Yeah.
But it's deceiving, right? Just heat, haze, and your viewpoint. He's saying regular stuff is kind of like that. It seems to have this solid nature, but it doesn't. Not really.
And then there's that argument about stuff appearing and disappearing, but not really going anywhere. He uses the fire element example.
Yeah, the fire element in your body, he says. When it starts, it doesn't come from some special fireplace. When it stops, it doesn't vanish to somewhere. It just exists, then doesn't, because it's not a fixed thing. Here, Your Majesty, he says, when the internal fire element arises, it doesn't come from anywhere. When it ceases, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't exist, then it exists. And having existed, it disappears again because it has no intrinsic nature. Kind of like how water changes, liquid to ice to vapor, but the waterness itself doesn't have some home base. It's pre-scientific, sure, but it gets you thinking about how impermanent everything is, how it's all connected.
Pretty mind-blowing how these old ideas can still be relevant today. Now, Madhyamaka itself has different, sub-schools, right? Where does Śāntideva fit into all that?
Traditionally, Tibetan Buddhists put him in the Prasaika school, the one associated with Luddapalita and Kendrakirti. They're big on using those reductio ad absurdum arguments, showing how other viewpoints just fall apart.
So they kind of poke holes in other arguments.
Exactly. But some scholars now are like, hold on, Śāntideva doesn't really get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff that supposedly separates Prasaika from the other main branch, Satantrika. The debate boils down to whether he's mainly refuting others, Prosaikika style, or also putting forward his own positive arguments, Svatantrika style.
So maybe these categories are a bit too neat and tidy.
Could be. Indian philosophy, it's super nuanced, sometimes hard to box in.
And we can't forget that super famous verse, BCA IX.139, the one about identifying the object of negation.
Yes. Tsongkhapa, the big Tibetan philosopher, thought that verse was key to understanding Madhyamaka. But even now, scholars are still debating exactly what it means and how it fits in. Shows how tough interpreting these texts can be.
For sure. One last thing about Śāntideva's metaphysics. He spends a lot of time arguing against the idea of a real, solid, my body. Why is that so important?
It goes straight to how we see ourselves in the world. He talks about this in BCA Chapter 9 and at the end of this Che. He's basically saying, if my body is some fixed thing, well, our bodies change all the time, so that can't be right. But if it's some abstract, unchanging essence, how can we even point to it, let alone say it's me? Neither idea works if you really think about it.
So no fixed me body to cling to.
Exactly. And that feeds directly into his ethical ideas, which we should probably talk about now.
Definitely. So we've explored Śāntideva's ideas about reality, super interesting stuff. But how does all that connect to how we should act?
All right, let's lay some groundwork first. At the heart of it all is the awakening mind, Bodhisattva. It's this super altruistic intention to become a Buddha, but not just for yourself. It's about helping all beings, no exceptions, and sticking around until everyone's free from suffering. People who cultivate this, they're called bodhisattvas.
So it's not like I'm going to reach enlightenment and peace out. It's more like everyone's coming with me.
Yeah, total game changer. Forget about individual salvation. It's universal liberation now.
And Śāntideva really spells it out in BCA X.55. As long as space abides and as long as the world abides, so long may I abide, destroying the sufferings of the world. That's a big commitment.
No kidding. And Chapter 3 of the BCA, it's all about how this bodhisattva arises and why it's so important. He uses this beautiful moving poetry to drive the point home, like finding a jewel in a trash heap, the elixir of life, a treasure that never runs out. One verse says, as a blind man might find a jewel in heaps of rubbish, so too this awakening mind has somehow appeared in me.
Wow, that really captures the feeling of finding something precious. So how do you live with this bodhisattva? What does a bodhisattva actually do?
They cultivate the 6 perfections: generosity, moral discipline, patient endurance, perseverance, meditative stability, and wisdom. These are like the building blocks of the bodhisattva path, and they actually form the structure of the BCA itself.
So each perfection gets its own chapter, kinda.
Exactly. And Śāntideva takes generosity seriously. It's not just giving stuff away, it's getting rid of the whole idea of mine in your head. He quotes a teaching saying, bodhisattvas think everything belongs to someone else. Owning stuff, it just breeds fear and clinging.
That's a tough one. Letting go of attachment, not easy.
You said it. And his take on patient endurance, that's really interesting from a philosophical standpoint. He's got this whole thing about anger, how it's never justified.
Never. But what if someone's being a total jerk?
Even then, he says anger's always harmful, messes you up mentally and spiritually. He thinks it always comes with some kind of messed up thinking, so gotta fight it with meditation and careful reflection.
So no righteous anger, huh?
Nope. Some people have even compared his view on anger to certain Hellenistic philosophies, which is kind of wild, seeing those parallels across cultures.
Definitely. Now, the Sun has this interesting focus on bodily discipline, how that connects to being a good person.
Yes, scholar Suzanne Rosick talks about this a lot. Śāntideva emphasizes that being moral isn't just in your head, it's about what you do with your body. Monastic stuff, rituals, even just paying close attention to your body and its feelings, moment by moment. He even says these practices can make you more attractive and healthier.
Interesting. So like morality working from the inside out.
Kinda. Though Rosick does point out, this could lead to judging people based on looks or health, which is obviously problematic.
Yeah, got to be careful with that. Now, what about this puja concept? It's usually translated as goodness or good karma, right? How does Śāntideva see it?
He's got a unique take on it, especially for bodhisattvas. You see, arhats, when they reach liberation, they're done creating new karma. But bodhisattvas, even the super advanced ones, Śāntideva says they keep cultivating goodness, good karma. But not for themselves. It's all about giving that goodness to others, helping them on their path.
So it's like they're generating good vibes to share.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Total focus on helping others. And another thing, he really stresses how all these Buddhist virtues are interconnected. like they work together.
So it's not like picking and choosing which ones you like.
Right. He says things like effort, intention, and compassion, they all work together to make you better. And moral discipline plus focused attention, they boost each other, help you really experience life fully. He says you should undertake to increase goodness through effort, intention, and compassion, which stabilize each other. And also, moral discipline and stable attention reinforce each other. The two together make it possible to embrace experience completely. This might be why he doesn't talk much about conflicts between virtues if they all support each other anyway.
It's a very holistic approach. Okay, so now for the big question. How does Śāntideva connect his mind-bending reality stuff to actual ethics, like what we should do?
Right. So scholar Ahmad Lloyd breaks this down. Śāntideva makes these arguments where he tries to get ethical rules directly from his philosophy.
Okay, walk us through it.
First one, no independent arising means got to practice patient endurance, no more anger. Śāntideva saying, all actions, good or bad, they come from a whole web of interconnected causes. Nothing exists on its own. So getting mad at someone who hurts you, it doesn't make sense. Their actions, they're just the result of a bunch of causes too.
So it's not like they're just evil or something. It's more complicated than that.
Way more. He says whatever transgressions and vile actions there are, all arise through the power of conditioning factors, while there's nothing that arises independently. He even says, think about those specific conditions that led to their bad behavior. That helps you stay calm, even when dealing with negativity. Since, like a magical display, phenomena do not initiate activity, at what does one get angry like this, he asks.
That's a good point. But this all ties into the whole free will versus determinism debate, right?
Huge philosophical can of worms. Lael says there are two ways to read Śāntideva's argument. One is hard incompatibilism. Basically, if everything's determined, there's no real basis for blaming people. It doesn't mean you can't stop harmful actions, but you do it to prevent future harm, not because someone deserves punishment.
Okay, so actions have consequences, but maybe not blame in the usual sense?
Right. The other reading is what Mark Sideritz calls Buddhist paleo-compatibilism. It says, okay, maybe there's no ultimate free will from a Yamaka view, but there's still this conventional free will that works in our everyday world. So we can still talk about blame and responsibility, but maybe in a different way.
So two different ways to understand how free will fits into all this.
Exactly. And there's this one verse, BCA VI.32, that everyone argues about. Śāntideva says resisting anger is good because since there is dependent origination, there can be cessation of suffering.
What's so controversial about that?
Paleocompatibilists, they say this shows Śāntideva kind of sneaking in the idea of self-control, at least on a conventional level.
Yeah.
But hard incompatibilists say no, he's just answering an objection, still saying there's no ultimate blame, just that resisting anger helps everyone in the long run.
Makes sense.
Oh, and regardless of the whole free will thing, Śāntideva has this compassionate point. People who hurt others, they're usually caught in their own negative feelings, not really in control. So the best response is compassion, wanting to help them break free. Tsongkhapa loved this idea, and it became super important in later Buddhist thought.
It's like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Kind of, but with compassion, not hate. Okay, Lele's second big point. Śāntideva connects the no self, no fixed body idea to ditching lust and changing how we think about protecting ourselves.
So how does that work?
He says we're proud of our bodies or attracted to others' bodies because we don't really get how impermanent and, well, kind of gross they are up close. He says in the Seuss, the body's like a machine, a mechanical construct of interconnected bones and muscles. Once you see that, you change how you relate to it emotionally. The body becomes a tool, basically. Something you use for spiritual practice and helping others. You protect it when it's useful, maybe even sacrifice it when it's not. Whoa, sacrifice your body? That's intense. It's a radical idea, for sure. Okay, third argument. No self means got to be altruistic. This is like central to his whole ethics.
I can see how that follows. If there's no separate self, then everyone's kind of in the same boat.
Exactly. He says suffering is suffering no matter who's feeling it. Everyone wants happiness. No one wants to suffer. So why put yourself first? He writes, I should dispel the suffering of others because it has suffering like my own suffering. I should help others too because of their nature as beings, which is like my own being. It's a call to universal compassion, caring for everyone equally.
Sounds great in theory, but don't we all have this feeling of, like, me being special, different from everyone else?
Oh, totally. That's where the ownerless suffering argument comes in. Śāntideva tackles this head on.
How does he do that?
He uses Abhidharma ideas, that no self thing again. He's saying, if we protect ourselves from future suffering we don't even feel yet, why wouldn't we protect others who are suffering right now? He uses this example. Pain in your foot, your hand doesn't feel it right. So is there really this single unified self that owns all your experiences? He says, without exception, no sufferings belong to anyone. They must be warded off simply because they're suffering. Why is any limitation put on this? It's like he's saying there's no real basis for putting yourself first, ethically speaking. And get this, he's kind of foreshadowing Derek Parfit, a modern philosopher who talks about personal identity.
Wow, ahead of his time. Okay, last argument Layla talks about. Emptiness means no attachment.
All right, if nothing truly exists on its own, then getting attached to anything, possessions, people, even your self-image, it's pointless, ultimately. Śāntideva asks, when all things are empty in this way, what can be received, what taken away? Who can be honored or humiliated by whom? From what can there be happiness or misery? What can be liked and what loathed? What craving can there be?
So if it's all empty, why get worked up about it?
Exactly. But some scholars say, hold on, emptiness doesn't mean things don't function conventionally. So maybe some attachment's unavoidable in our everyday lives. Still a debate going on there.
Lots to think about. Now, let's get to a big debate about Śāntideva's ethics. Is he a consequentialist?
That's a hot topic. Some stuff he says definitely sounds consequentialist. Like in the chess, he says a Bodhisattva messes up if they don't work to stop suffering and help everyone be happy. And that includes causing a little suffering if it stops more suffering later, or giving up a small benefit for a bigger one.
So like maximizing happiness, minimizing suffering for the most beings possible?
You got it. And if this passage is really talking about utilitarianism, that means he was doing it like 1,000 years before Bentham. Which is pretty amazing. He doesn't get into the nitty-gritty calculations like some utilitarians, but he definitely talks about trade-offs between your own well-being and the well-being of others. Like he says, sacrificing your life for someone with equal compassion is good.
So your life isn't the most important thing. It's about the greater good.
Yeah, classic consequentialist thinking. And get this, he even says sometimes it's okay to do stuff that's usually considered bad, like eating meat, stealing, even giving someone alcohol or weapons if it leads to a bigger benefit in the end. In the BCA, he says, even what is prescribed is permitted for a compassionate person who sees it will be of benefit.
So the ends justify the means, in a way.
Kind of, but the motivation has to be compassion, and you got to be pretty sure it'll lead to good stuff. There's also this passage in the Sariyas where he says bodhisattvas should focus on everyone reaching enlightenment, and then he asks, who cares who actually makes the world better?
So it doesn't matter who does the good deed as long as it gets done.
That's the idea of agent neutrality, a big part of consequentialism.
Okay, but not everyone agrees that Śāntideva is a straight-up consequentialist, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Gordon Davis, he says, Śāntideva's focus on everyone becoming Buddhas, which means perfect equality, suggests he values equality for its own sake, not just as a way to make people happy. That's more like Kant with his kingdom of ends idea. And Demian Keown, he says, Buddhist ethics are kind of like Aristotle's virtue ethics, where it's all about developing good character. Śāntideva definitely emphasizes that.
So maybe consequentialism isn't the whole picture.
Right. And then there's Stephen Harris. He's more critical. He's like, maybe we shouldn't even try to pin down one specific theory for Śāntideva.
Whoa, really? Why not?
Well, Harris points out that the BCA, it's not just a philosophy book, it's also a guide for meditation. So some of what Śāntideva says might be more about like inner transformation than objective truth.
So maybe we shouldn't take everything literally.
Maybe not. And then there's upaya, skillful means. It's this idea that Buddhas and great teachers, they might teach things that aren't ultimately true, but they help people on their path.
So it's like a white lie for your own good.
Kinda. But it makes it tough to know when Śāntideva is giving his real view and when he's being strategic.
I can see how that would be confusing.
Then there's the fortunate coincidence thesis, which basically says being selfish and being altruistic, in the end, they lead to the same place. If your happiness depends on everyone else's happiness, like Śāntideva says, is it really selfish or altruistic anymore?
It's like, is there even a difference at that point?
Exactly. Makes it tough to label him one way or another. And Harris even says the ownerless suffering argument, the one that sounds super consequentialist, maybe it's an upaya too. It uses Abhidharma metaphysics, which isn't exactly Śāntideva's Madhyamaka view.
So much debate.
Yep. People are still figuring out Śāntideva's ethical theory.
Definitely keeps things interesting. So big picture, what have we learned about Śāntideva, especially for those of us who like to get philosophical?
Well, we saw his arguments about no self and emptiness, really deep stuff about reality. That forms the basis for his whole ethical system. And his ethics, It's all about bodhicitta, that desire to help everyone reach enlightenment, and the 6 perfections. Those are the practical steps to get there. We also talked about the big debate over his ethical theory. Is he a consequentialist, not a consequentialist, or something else entirely?
Yeah, he's a complex thinker for sure, but his writings are surprisingly accessible and his ideas are powerful, really get you thinking about some big questions.
You said it. And he's not afraid to use all sorts of tools to make his points, logic, poetry, stories, whatever works. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
And he brings up these unique ideas, like how all the Buddha's teachings fit together, that ownerless suffering argument, and how he tackles the whole free will problem. He really pushed the boundaries of Indian Buddhist thought.
So, listeners, as you're processing all this, think about what it means for understanding reality and living a good life. Which parts of Shantideva's arguments really hit home for you, and why? Maybe you'll even want to check out his writings yourself, or dive into some of the scholarly work about him. There's always more to discover with Shantideva.